Before we start, make sure you subscribe and like this video. My wife cheated on me. Now everyone in town is dying. I barged through my front door and sprinted up the stairs. I made a run for the bedroom door before kicking it open. I know he's in here, goddammit. Where are you hiding him this time? I screamed. My wife Susan was shocked to see me back from work and was sitting in bed reading a book. I don't know what you are talking about, honey. I've been here all morning. I could tell from the red glow on my wife's cheeks and the beads of sweat rolling down her forehead. She was doing more than reading a book. I know that scumbag is here. I can still smell his stinking aftershave. I grabbed the blankets and ripped them off the bed. Susan tried her best to cover her naked body. It's 2 in the afternoon. Why are you in bed naked? Susan looked like a rabbit caught in a headlight. She stuttered as her brain tried to make up a plausible answer. I began tearing the room apart when suddenly I heard the sound of labored breathing coming from the closet. I felt a rage of red mist descend upon me before whipping open the closet doors. As I drove back to work, I couldn't get the image of Mason Bradley and his fat gut on top of my wife. Intrusive thoughts about my wife's infidelities permeated my mind as I drove my truck. At 37, my life wasn't where I expected it to be. My dreams of running my own company were as broken as the beat-up pickup truck I used to drive to work. My truck rumbled up to the gates of the steel mill. The security guard at the gate barely acknowledged my existence as the truck roared past him. As I turned into the car park, I noticed my boss, Big Ed, waiting for me. As I got out of my truck, Big Ed came scurrying over. For a man who ran $1 million company, he always looked as if he was out panhandling for his next meal. His slacks were 2 sizes too big, and he wore the same t-shirt every day. What are you doing tomorrow, Jack? I hated how Big Ed spoke to me. He had a habit of spitting after every sentence and would sometimes spit directly at me. I was going to surprise my wife tomorrow and take her somewhere nice. Big Ed hitched his slacks up onto his gut. Listen here now, Jack. My car has been giving me some trouble and I need you to service her. Couldn't you get someone else to do it? I could tell he was getting annoyed with my attitude. If you want your job Monday, you will do what you're told. He had me over a barrel and knew I couldn't afford to lose the only job the town had to offer. I'll be over first thing in the morning. I arrived at Ed's dilapidated mansion. Ed was outside with his car swooning over her like it was some beautiful young woman. His face lit up as he ran his hands over the bonnet of the truck. Be gentle with her. She's all I got, said Ed. Ed looked slightly smarter than his usual unkempt manner. You got a date, Ed? When the cats are away, the mice will play, said Ed as he gave me a mischievous wink. Ed pulled a red handkerchief from his back pocket and wiped the sweat from his forehead. I see one scratch on her, and I will snap your neck. I was weary from a long day babysitting Ed's car. All I wanted to do was throw my feet up and have a nice cold beer. I stepped in my front door and was suddenly hit by a familiar smell. It smelt like Big Ed's nasty cologne, but I was too tired to take much notice. My body ached as I grabbed a beer from the kitchen before collapsing onto my chair. As I sat there, sipping beer and reevaluating my life's predicaments, I noticed something sticking from the armrest of my couch. I walked over and picked up the red piece of cloth. The same red piece of cloth Big Ed used to wipe the beady sweat from his grubby forehead. I unfolded the cloth, and to my dismay, there was Ed's name embroidered in the hanky. I was heartbroken and furious. I knew what it meant, and all I wanted to do was tear the house down with my bare hands, but I knew better than to let my anger get the best of me. My eyes welled up as I sped down the country road. I turned the radio up full blast to drown out my intrusive thoughts. I was too embroiled in a battle with my conciseness to notice the dark figure walking in the middle of the road. By the time I noticed, it was too late. I slammed on the brakes and covered my eyes before the car came to a halt. To my relief, I couldn't find any signs of someone injured. I convinced myself stress was making me go crazy. As I tried jumping back in my truck, I heard someone approaching from behind. "Having trouble, buddy?" I felt a cold chill up my spine. Something was telling me to run, but my legs had turned to jelly from fear. A dark figure stepped out from the shadows of the looming trees overhead. "I thought I had hit someone with my truck," I nervously explained. I couldn't make out who I was talking to. All I could see was an outline of a tall, dark figure. "I hear you're having trouble with your wife." "Do I know you?" I nervously asked. Suddenly, the dark figure came into focus, revealing an old man. He took something from his pocket before handing it to me. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Big Ed's red handkerchief. "How did you—" I began stuttering. "What is it you desire?" asked the old man. Suddenly, a strange feeling swept over me. A feeling of intense euphoria crept up from my toes, flooding my brain. I wished every man who sleeps with my wife would get sick and die a slow, painful death. The words seemed to come out of my mouth as if someone else was saying. Suddenly, everything began to spin, and before I knew it, I was back in my truck. I reluctantly drove into work after spending a night in a dingy motel. All I wanted to do was punch Big Ed in his fat face. But with my marriage on the rocks, I knew I couldn't afford it. When I arrived, I was surprised to see Mason Bradley wasn't at his station. I didn't give it much thought until I saw Big Ed coming from the bathroom, looking like death warmed up. "Hey, Ed, you don't look so good." Ed stood there looking pale as a ghost, trying to keep the contents of his stomach from ejecting from his mouth. "I think it was something I ate," he explained, as I took a step back from him. "Has this anything to do with Bradley being out?" I asked. "Yeah, he was too sick to make it in today. Must be a bug doing the rounds." Over the next few days, I watched Big Ed get weaker until there was no sign of him. I had gotten word that Mason Bradley had died, and from what I was told, Big Ed wasn't far behind. Since Big Ed wasn't in, we knocked off early. As I drove home, I stopped at the local gas station to pick up some beers. Phil, the owner, was at the counter, looking like he was about to pass out. "You all right, Phil? You're looking a bit pale there, buddy." Phil covered his mouth, trying his best not to puke all over the counter. "I'm after picking up this bug that's going around." It couldn't be, I thought to myself, as I suddenly remembered the strange encounter I had the other night, the one I was sure was just a strange dream. "You look after yourself, Phil, and get yourself to a doctor. Will you give my love to that beautiful wife of yours and tell her I'll drop over her magazines once I feel better," said Phil, before dashing for the bathroom. As I drove into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Stevens standing outside her house, looking distraught. "What's wrong, Anne?" I asked. "It's Mike. They took him to the hospital." "Who took him?" Mr. Stevens was too distraught to get her words out. "Men in hazmat suits." I felt the familiar feeling of despair rise from the pit of my stomach. "Who else got sick?" Bob, Tony from across the road, the guy who delivers the milk. They're dropping like flies. Days went by, and news of men getting sick and dying all over town continued to trickle in. Suddenly, I was hit with the realization that the man I met a few weeks ago wasn't a figment of my imagination. I wrestled with the guilt of everyone dying and the heartbreak of my wife's infidelity. I didn't want people dying, and if this was my fault, I needed to fix it. I got in my truck and began driving the same road as before. I was overwhelmed with the thoughts of people dying and the guilt and grief it brought with it. As I drove, I suddenly spotted the old man sitting by the roadside. I slammed on the brakes and jumped from my truck. I ran to the old man before dropping to my knees. Please, I beg you, whatever you have done, you need to take it back. The old man gave me a confused look. But it was what you desired. Why would you want to take it back? I was upset, but I didn't want people to die. Please, it's not what I desire, I cried. The old man put his hand on my shoulder. What is it you truly desire? All I want is my wife to love me and only me, I begged. Suddenly, I was overcome with that same feeling of euphoria. My world began to spin before I was suddenly back in my truck, and the old man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked in my front door, Susan was standing there waiting for me. She had a look on her face I had never seen before. She ran and threw her arms around me before kissing me passionately. I love you so much, Jack. Can you please forgive me? Of course I forgive you. I always do. My wife's face lit up, and for the first time, I could feel a genuine sense of love from her, a feeling I always desired. From now on, you're the only man I want and need, she said, as she led me upstairs to the bedroom. That night, we made passionate love, as if we were the only two people that existed in the world. After we finished, we spent the rest of the night cuddling and planning for a better future together. The following morning, I woke with a splitting headache. As the days followed, I was stuck to the toilet, puking my guts up. As I got weaker, the terrifying realization of the first wish hit me like a ton of bricks. I write this as I'm in the final throes of death as a warning to others. Be careful what you wish for. My fiance's voice was on a disturbing DVD I received 3 days before our wedding. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post on a forum like this, but I'm desperate. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that I'm still running from. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Lily, 28 years old, and I was engaged to James for a little over a year. We met at a charity fundraiser, hit it off immediately, and it had been a whirlwind romance ever since. He was charming, successful, and came from a well-respected family in our small town of Oakwood. Everything seemed perfect until 3 days before the wedding. I was sorting through the mail, sifting past the usual pile of RSVPs and last-minute wedding cards, when I found a padded envelope with no return address. Curious, I tore it open. Inside was a plain DVD in a clear case, unmarked except for a post-it note that read, "Watch me." Now, I know what you're thinking. Who still uses DVDs in 2024? But my curiosity got the better of me. I popped it into the ancient player hooked up to our living room TV, left over from when James moved in. The screen flickered to life, and what I saw, God, I wish I could unsee it. It started with a dimly lit forest clearing. The camera was shaky, like someone was filming on an old handheld camcorder. Figures in dark robes moved around a bonfire, their faces hidden behind grotesque animal masks. The flames cast eerie shadows, making their movements seem jerky and unnatural. I was about to turn it off, thinking it was some sick prank, when I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. "Bring forth the sacrifice." It was James. I'd know his voice anywhere, the slight southern drawl, the way he emphasizes certain words, but this wasn't the warm, loving tone I was used to. This was cold, commanding, almost cruel. The robed figures parted, and two of them dragged forward what looked like a person, bound and struggling. I couldn't make out any details in the flickering firelight, but the muffled screams sent shivers down my spine. I slammed my hand on the power button, my heart racing. What the hell had I just watched? It had to be fake, right? Some elaborate hoax. With shaking hands, I rewound the video and played that part again and again. Each time, I became more certain that was James's voice. I must have watched it a dozen times before I heard the front door open. James was home. I yanked the DVD out of the player and shoved it into the first hiding spot I could think of, the pocket of my bathrobe hanging on the back of the door. "Lily, you home, sweetheart?" James called out. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "In here," I managed to croak out. He walked in, all smiles and warmth, leaning in to kiss me. I flinched away instinctively. "Everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern. I forced a smile. "Just wedding jitters, I guess." He laughed, pulling me into a hug. "Cold feet already? Don't worry, it'll all be perfect." As I stood there in his embrace, my mind raced. The man holding me seemed nothing like the cold voice on that video, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. "Hey," James said, pulling back to look at me. "You sure you're all right? You look pale." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Well, I've got a surprise for you." He grinned. "Remember that necklace you loved at the antique store? I went back and got it for you. Thought it'd be perfect for the wedding." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a pendant, a tiny animal skull, intricately carved. I felt the blood drain from my face. It looked just like the masks in the video. "Don't you like it?" James asked, his smile faltering. It's beautiful," I lied. "I'm just overwhelmed. Thank you." As he fastened it around my neck, his fingers brushing my skin, all I could think was, who are you, really? And what have I gotten myself into? I spent most of that night tossing and turning, my mind racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those masked figures dancing around the fire. I kept hearing James's voice, cold and commanding, echoing in my head. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. There was a note on James's pillow. "Gone for a run. Back soon. Love you." I don't know what possessed me, but I found myself creeping into his office. I'd never snooped before. I'd always trusted him completely. But now I felt like I was living with a stranger. His desk was meticulously organized, as always. I started rifling through drawers, not sure what I was looking for. Old bills, work documents, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I opened the bottom drawer. My hands trembled as I lifted out a small wooden box. It was beautifully carved with intricate symbols I didn't recognize. My heart pounding, I opened it. Inside was a collection of what looked like tiny bones, animal bones, I hoped. There was also a small vial of dark liquid, a lock of hair tied with a red ribbon, and a USB drive. I grabbed the drive and rushed to my laptop. As it loaded, I heard the front door open. James was back. "Lily?" he called out. "Just a sec," I shouted back, my voice unnaturally high. The drive finished loading, revealing a single video file. I didn't have time to watch it, so I quickly emailed it to myself and deleted the sent email. Then, thinking quickly, I uploaded it to a secure cloud storage account I rarely used, under a fake name. I had just closed my laptop when James walked in, flushed from his run. "There you are," he smiled, leaning in to kiss me. I forced myself not to pull away. "What are you up to?" "Oh, just confirming some last-minute wedding details," I lied. His eyes narrowed slightly. "In my office. I was looking for stamps," I said lamely. "For thank you cards." He stared at me for a long moment, then his face relaxed into a smile. But there was something off about it, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Well, no need to start those yet. We've got a lifetime ahead of us for thank you notes." As he headed to the shower, I let out a shaky breath. Had he bought my lie? Or was he just playing along? I spent the rest of the day in a fog, going through the motions of last-minute wedding prep. James seemed normal, loving, excited about our big day. But now, every smile, every touch felt off, like he was wearing a mask, and I could see the edges where it didn't quite fit. That night, after James fell asleep, I snuck out to the living room with my laptop. With shaking hands, I opened the video file from the USB. It started similarly to the DVD. The same forest clearing, the same bonfire. But this time, the camera was steady, the image clearer. I could make out more details of the robed figures, the animal masks even more disturbing in high definition. James's voice rang out again. "The time has come. Our sacrifice has been prepared." The camera panned to show a stone altar. On it lay a person, no, a woman, struggling against her bonds. Her face was covered, but I could see long dark hair spilling over the edge of the altar. Hair that looked disturbingly like mine. One of the masked figures approached the altar, raising a wicked-looking knife. "With this blood, we seal our pact," James intoned. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. This couldn't be real. It had to be some elaborate movie prop, right? A sick joke. But deep down, I knew this was real, and I was in danger. I must have made some noise, because suddenly, James was there in the doorway. "Lily, what are you doing up?" I looked up at him. This man I thought I knew. This man I was supposed to marry tomorrow. And I felt nothing but terror. I couldn't sleep, I managed to say. He came closer, his eyes darting to the closed laptop. "Wedding jitters again. Come on, let's go back to bed. Everything will be better in the morning." As he led me back to our room, his hand on the small of my back, all I could think was, would I even survive until morning? I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't go through with the wedding, but I also knew I couldn't just confront James, not when I'd seen what he was capable of. I needed to run, but how? Where would I go? As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I made a decision. I had to get out, and I had to do it now. I pretended to be asleep as James got up, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it. I felt his lips brush my forehead. "See you at the altar, my love," he whispered before leaving. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I sprang into action. I grabbed a small backpack and started throwing in essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, phone charger. I emptied out my rainy day cash stash, about $500. and shoved it into the bag. Then I grabbed my purse, making sure the DVD was still there. I ran to James's office and retrieved the wooden box from his desk drawer. My hands shook as I opened it, half expecting the bones inside to start rattling on their own. I don't know why I took it. Evidence, I guess. Or maybe I thought it might give me some clue about what James was really up to. I was about to leave when I noticed something I'd missed before. A small notebook tucked under some papers. I flipped it open and felt my blood run cold. It was filled with names and dates. Some were crossed out, others circled. Next to each circled name was a symbol, the same symbols carved into the wooden box. And there, on the last page, was my name. Next to it was that day's date, and a symbol I hadn't seen before, a star inside a circle. I shoved the notebook into my bag along with the box and ran out of the house. I got into my car, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Mrs. Henderson from next door giving me a strange look. I realized how odd I must look, the bride fleeing on her wedding day. I drove to the police station, my mind racing. This was it. I was going to expose everything, but as I sat in the parking lot, doubt crept in. What exactly was I going to tell them? That my fiancée was part of some weird cult? That I'd found some creepy videos and a box of bones? It all seemed so unbelievable. And then there was his family to consider. The Blackwoods practically owned this town. James's father was a judge, his uncle the chief of police. Who would believe me over them? Before I could change my mind again, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my maid of honor, asking where I was. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a whole wedding party waiting for me. Dozens of guests would be arriving soon. In a moment of panic, I made a decision that would haunt me for months to come. I drove to the Oakwood Inn, where the wedding was to be held. As soon as I walked in, I was swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Hair, makeup, getting into my dress. My bridesmaids chatted excitedly around me, but their voices sounded distant, like I was underwater. Lily? Earth to Lily. My maid of honor, Sarah, was waving her hand in front of my face. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a smile. Just nervous, I guess. She squeezed my hand. Cold feet are normal. But trust me, once you see James waiting for you at the end of that aisle, all your doubts will melt away. If only she knew. As I stood there in the bridal suite, my heart pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I made a decision. I was going to face this head on. No more running, no more hiding. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and opened the door. My dad was waiting to walk me down the aisle, his eyes misty with pride. If only he knew. The wedding march began, and we started our walk. The church was packed, every eye on me, but I only saw James, standing at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. For a moment, my resolve wavered. How could this man, who looked at me with such love, be involved in something so sinister? As I reached the altar, James took my hand, his touch sending conflicting waves of comfort and terror through me. The officiant began the ceremony, his words washing over me in a blur. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was it, my last chance. I cleared my throat. I have something to say. A collective gasp went through the church. James's hand tightened on mine, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and, was that fear? "Lily," he whispered, his voice tight. "What are you doing?" I turned to face the congregation, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. "I'm sorry, but I can't go through with this wedding. Not until I get some answers." I pulled out my phone and the DVD from my bouquet. "James, I need you to explain this. Now." His face went pale as he recognized the DVD. "Where did you get that?" he hissed, his charming facade cracking. "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice carrying through the now silent church. "What matters is what's on it. A ritual in the woods, people in masks, your voice, talking about sacrifices." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw James's parents exchange a worried glance. "Lily, please," James said, reaching for me, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "This isn't the time or place." I stepped back. "No, no more secrets. No more lies. Tell me the truth, James. What are you involved in?" For a moment, he just stared at me, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then, to my shock, he started to laugh. It wasn't a joyful sound, but hollow and tinged with bitterness. "Oh, Lily," he said, shaking his head. "You weren't supposed to find out. Not like this. Not yet." He turned to face the congregation, his posture changing, becoming more commanding. "I suppose the cat's out of the bag now. Sorry, folks, but this wedding's going to be a little different than planned." To my horror, several people in the pews stood up. They reached into their jackets and pulled out those terrifying animal masks I'd seen in the video. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice rising with panic. "James, what is this?" He turned back to me, his eyes cold now, all pretense of love gone. "It's our legacy, Lily. Our birthright. The Blackwood family has been the guardians of this town for generations. We keep the balance, make the hard choices so others don't have to." "Guardians? Hard choices? You're talking about human sacrifice." He winced. "It's more complicated than that. The rituals, they protect the town, keep evil at bay. Without them, this place would fall into chaos and ruin." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "This is insane. You're all insane." "I know it sounds crazy," James said, taking a step toward me, his voice low and urgent. "But I love you, Lily. I chose you not just as my wife, but as my partner in this. You're strong enough to bear this burden with me." "Bear this burden? James, you're talking about murder." "No," a new voice rang out. I turned to see James's father standing up, his face grave. "Not murder. Sacrifice. There's a difference." More people were standing now, donning masks. I looked around wildly, realizing with growing horror that at least half the guests were in on this. "The woman in the video," I said, a terrible thought occurring to me. "The one on the altar. Was that supposed to be me?" James's composure cracked completely. His eyes darted around nervously, and sweat beaded on his forehead. No, that was a rehearsal of sorts, to prepare you for your role." "My role? As what? Some kind of ritualistic murderer?" "As protector," he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "Lily, please, just listen. Let me explain everything. You'll understand." For a moment, I wavered. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted there to be some explanation that would make all of this okay. But then I remembered the terror in that woman's eyes, the cold command in James's voice. Whatever this was, it wasn't right. I took another step back. "No, I don't want to understand. I want no part of this." I turned to run, but found my path blocked by masked figures, They were closing in from all sides, the animal masks grotesque in the church's dim light. "I'm sorry, Lily," James said from behind me, his voice cold again. "But you don't have a choice. Once you're part of this, you're part of it for life." I felt a hand grip my arm, and panic surged through me. Without thinking, I lashed out, my elbow connecting with someone's face. There was a cry of pain, and suddenly, chaos erupted. Guests were screaming, some running for the exits, while others, the masked ones, tried to grab me. I saw my parents being held back by men in suits, confusion and terror on their faces. "Get her!" James shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Don't let her leave." I ducked under grasping hands, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I caught a glimpse of Sarah, my maid of honor, her eyes wide with shock. "Run!" I screamed at her. "Get out of here!" I made it to the church doors, shoving them open with all my strength. Outside, I could hear sirens in the distance. For a moment, relief washed over for me. The police were coming. But then I remembered. James's uncle was the chief of police. They weren't coming to help me. My wedding dress caught on something as I fled, tearing a long strip from the hem. I didn't care. I just ran, my bare feet pounding against the pavement, my lungs burning. I could hear shouts behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I found myself in the parking lot, surrounded by rows of cars. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. I didn't have my keys. Then I spotted Sarah's car. She always kept a spare key hidden in the wheel well. My shaking hands found it, and seconds later, I was peeling out of the lot, tires screeching. In my rearview mirror, I saw James and several masked figures burst out of the church. James's face was contorted with rage, a far cry from the loving man I thought I knew. He pointed at my retreating car, shouting something I couldn't hear. I drove like a mad woman, weaving through traffic and blowing through red lights. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror sent a jolt of fear through me. Were they following me? How far did their influence reach? It wasn't until I crossed the state line that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I pulled into a run-down motel, paid cash for a room, and collapsed onto the bed, still in my torn wedding dress. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. My entire life had just imploded. The man I loved, the future I'd planned, it was all a lie. And now I was a fugitive, running from a cult that had infiltrated every level of my hometown society. I curled up on the bed, violent sobs racking my body. The events of the day played on repeat in my mind. James's cold laughter, the grotesque masks, the terror on my parents' faces. What had happened to them? Were they safe? Or had the cult done something to them? Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. I dreamed of masked figures chasing me through endless dark forests, of James standing over me with a knife, of altars stained with blood. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back, and I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. I spent the next few days in a daze, barely leaving the motel room. I survived on vending machine snacks and cheap coffee, jumping at every sound outside my door. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but I had no idea where to go or what to do next. On the third day, I finally worked up the courage to check the news on my phone. There was nothing about a wedding gone wrong, no reports of a missing bride. It was as if nothing had happened. The Blackwoods must have covered it all up. That's when I knew I couldn't just run and hide. They would find me eventually. And even if they didn't, how many other innocent people would suffer because of their rituals? I had to do something. I had to expose them. But how? I had no proof beyond the DVD and the contents of that wooden box, which I'd left behind in my panic. My word against theirs wouldn't be enough, not when they controlled the town. That's when I remembered I'd emailed myself the video from the USB drive and uploaded it to a cloud storage account. With shaking hands, I logged into my email on my phone. The message was still there, unopened. I downloaded the file and watched it again, forcing myself to look for any details that might help identify the location or the people involved. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I began researching, digging into the history of Oakwood and the Blackwood family. I reached out to investigative journalists, to podcasters who specialized in exposing cults. Most ignored me. A few responded, intrigued but skeptical. One journalist, a woman named Elena, seemed particularly interested. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in a nearby city. As I sat waiting for her, my nerves were on edge. Every person who walked in made me flinch. Was that James? Did that woman's bag look like it could be hiding a mask? Elena turned out to be a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my story without interruption, her face growing more serious with each detail. "I believe you," she said when I finished. "I've heard whispers about the Blackwoods before, but never anything this concrete. This could be big, Lily. Really big." For the first time since my wedding day, I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by Elena's next words. "But we need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, these people are powerful and dangerous. We need more evidence before we can go public with this." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "So what do we do now?" Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low. "We dig deeper. I have some contacts who might be able to help. But Lily, you need to understand. This could take time, and it could be dangerous." As if to emphasize her point, at that moment, a man in a dark suit walked into the coffee shop. He looked around casually, but something about him made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Eleanor must have noticed my reaction. "Go," she said quietly. "Use the back door. I'll be in touch." I slipped out of the coffee shop, my heart pounding. As I walked briskly down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. For months, I moved from town to town, always looking over my shoulder, never staying in one place for long. I worked odd jobs for cash, using public libraries to continue my research. Slowly, with Eleanor's help, I began to piece together a picture of just how deep the Blackwoods' influence ran. There were whispers of other towns, other families like the Blackwoods, a network of guardians stretching across the country, maybe even beyond. The more I uncovered, the more terrified and determined I became. But the constant fear and stress were taking their toll. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I jumped at every unexpected sound, flinched at every touch. Sleep became a luxury, always interrupted by vivid nightmares of masked figures and blood-stained altars. One night, in yet another anonymous motel room, I woke up screaming, convinced I'd seen James standing at the foot of my bed. It took me hours to convince myself it had just been a dream. I'm writing this now from another motel room, my hands shaking as I type. I don't know if they're still looking for me, I don't know if I'll ever be able to go home again, but I do know that I can't stop until the truth comes out. To anyone reading this, be careful. Evil doesn't always look like you expect it to. Sometimes it wears a charming smile and offers you a diamond ring. Sometimes it hides behind respectability and tradition. And if you're ever invited to a wedding in a small town called Oakwood, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because trust me, some vows are better left unspoken. I don't know what will happen next, but I do know one thing. I'm going to bring them down. Somehow, some way, I'm going to expose the Blackwood family and their twisted rituals. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find a way to save the next bride they try to recruit. If you have any information that might help, or if you've experienced something similar, please reach out. But be careful. They're watching. They're always watching. And to James, if you're reading this, I loved you. I really did. But I will never, ever be part of your legacy. You chose the wrong bride to sacrifice. Update. For those asking, yes, I've managed to contact some friends and family. Sarah, whose car I took, is safe. She got out during the chaos. Others, I'm not sure. Some act like nothing happened. Others have vanished. I don't know if they're threatened, recruited, or worse. I've moved again, kept seeing a black SUV outside my motel, and one night, I swear I saw someone in an animal mask watching my room. Paranoia? Maybe, but I'm not risking it. The journalist Eleanor and I are making progress. We found financial records hinting at a network of families like the Blackwoods in other towns. It's not enough yet, but we're getting there. Oakwood seems fine so far. No catastrophes. Did they find another sacrifice? Or was it all just for power? I don't know. I'm exhausted, scared, and some days it's hard to keep going. But I think of potential victims out there, and I know I can't stop.